welcome. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Or, I might show up at your door. I'm just here to share some creepy stories, so sit back and enjoy. Disclaimer: the content presented in the video is purely for entertainment purposes only. The theories and stories discussed in this video are speculative and are not supported by any evidence or proof. Viewer discretion is advised. Ranger Log Entry, October 15, 2025. Monongahela National Forest, West Virginia. Ranger Station 7 Liam Parker. The static on the emergency radio woke me at 5:47 a.m., crackling through my cabin like electricity through dry leaves. I'd been dreaming about the old Cherokee stories Mia used to tell. Something about watchers in the woods. Fitting, considering what I'd write in this log by day's end. Emergency broadcast to all hikers and campers in Monongahela National Forest. Reports of aggressive wildlife behavior in sectors 12 through 18. Avoid solo hiking. Travel in groups of 3 or more. Maintain campfires through the night. This message will repeat. Aggressive wildlife. In 23 years patrolling these mountains, I'd seen black bears swipe at surprised campers and the occasional ornery wild boar, but nothing that warranted emergency broadcasts at dawn. The radio crackled again, the same message, but something felt off about the announcer's voice. Too measured. Like someone reading from a script they didn't quite believe. I pulled on my boots and stepped onto the cabin's porch, breathing in the October air that carried scents of dying leaves and mountain mist. The forest stretched endlessly before me, a tapestry of amber and rust that should have felt peaceful. Instead, an odd silence hung over everything. No bird calls, no rustling of small creatures in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. My radio crackled to life with dispatch. Liam, you copy? Detective Cross needs to meet with you at Seneca Rocks Trailhead. Missing persons case. Ava Cross. I hadn't seen her since the Henderson boy got lost last spring, though that had ended well. Kid was found building a fort 2 ridges over. This felt different. The urgency in dispatch's voice suggested something more serious than a lost hiker. The drive to Seneca Rocks took 40 minutes through winding mountain roads. Fog clung to the valleys like cobwebs, and I noticed something that made my skin crawl. No roadkill. These mountain highways usually claimed at least a few deer, raccoons, or possums each week, but the asphalt was clean. Where had all the animals gone? Detective Cross was waiting beside her patrol car, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail that couldn't hide the tension in her shoulders. Ava had always been direct, but today she looked genuinely worried. 3 missing campers, she said without preamble, handing me a manila folder. The Hendersons, Tom, Lisa, and their teenage daughter Emma. Last seen 4 days ago setting up camp in Sector 15. I flipped through the photos. A typical suburban family, all smiles and hiking gear. The father wore one of those expensive GPS watches that tracked everything from heart rate to elevation. The mother clutched a professional camera. The daughter looked bored but healthy. Any sign of their campsite? I asked. That's the problem. We found it yesterday, but Ava paused, choosing her words carefully. It's intact. Tent still staked, sleeping bags laid out, food sealed properly. Coffee pot still had grounds in it, but no sign of the family. The folder contained crime scene photos of the campsite. Everything looked normal except for one detail that made my ranger instincts scream. The fire ring. The stones were arranged in a perfect circle, but the ashes formed strange patterns, geometric shapes that looked almost deliberate. In 23 years, I'd never seen random campfire ash settle like that. Could be animal predation? I offered, though I didn't believe it myself. Tom Henderson was 6'2" and weighed over 200 pounds. What kind of animal takes down a grown man, his wife and daughter without leaving blood, drag marks, or torn fabric? Ava's voice carried the frustration of a cop facing something outside normal experience. We walked the Henderson campsite together, and I noticed details the initial search had missed. The dirt around the tents showed no signs of struggle, but there were impressions, shallow circular marks about the size of silver dollars, arranged in clusters of 2. They didn't match any animal tracks I knew, and they seemed to follow a pattern, leading from the campsite toward the deeper forest. "Liam," Ava said quietly, "there's something else. This isn't the first disappearance this month. 2 other groups went missing in the past 3 weeks, all in sectors 12 through 18. The same sectors mentioned in the morning's emergency broadcast." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. As evening approached, I volunteered to stay overnight at the Henderson site, hoping to spot something the day searchers had missed. Ava reluctantly agreed, making me promise to radio in every hour. She drove away as shadows lengthened between the trees, leaving me alone with the strange silence that seemed to follow me everywhere that day. I built my own fire using the Henderson's ring, trying to ignore how the stones felt warm to the touch despite the cool evening air. The emergency broadcast repeated every 30 minutes, but now I noticed variations, subtle changes in timing, slight differences in the announcer's inflection. Why would a simple wildlife advisory need updating? Around 10 p.m., I heard it, a soft clicking sound, like someone tapping 2 stones together. It came from the forest's edge, rhythmic and deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and approached slowly, every ranger instinct telling me to be cautious. The clicking stopped. I swept my flashlight beam across the tree line, illuminating pine boughs and mountain laurel. Nothing moved, but as I started to turn away, something made me look up. 2 points of amber light watched me from 30 feet up in an old oak tree. Not the typical reflection of an animal's eyes caught in a flashlight beam. These glowed with their own internal fire. They were perfectly round, perfectly symmetrical, and perfectly still. I blinked. They vanished. My radio crackled. "Remember, maintain campfires through the night." I spent the rest of that October evening feeding my fire and writing this log entry, glancing frequently at the dark tree line. Those glowing orbs never reappeared, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, waiting, learning. What kind of aggressive wildlife glows in the dark and leaves geometric patterns in campfire ash? And why do I have the unsettling suspicion that the emergency broadcasts aren't meant to protect us, but to warn something else that we're here? End of log entry, October 15th, 2025. Ranger log entry, October 16th, 2025. Monongahela National Forest, West Virginia. Ranger Station 7 Liam Parker. The emergency broadcast changed overnight. Advisory to all forest visitors. Avoid nocturnal forest activities until further notice. Unusual animal behavior patterns documented. Do not approach unknown tracks or sounds. Report any sightings to local authorities immediately. Nocturnal activities. Yesterday it was aggressive wildlife. Today they're telling people to stay inside after dark. The voice was different too. A woman this time, speaking faster, with an edge of genuine concern that yesterday's scripted announcer had lacked. I spent the morning following those strange circular tracks from the Henderson campsite. They led deeper into Sector 15, following game trails that wound through dense stands of mountain laurel and rhododendron. What bothered me wasn't just their unusual shape, but their depth or lack thereof. These impressions barely disturbed the forest floor, as if whatever made them weighed almost nothing despite leaving such distinct marks. 3 miles in, the tracks converged with others. Dozens of them, creating intersecting patterns that hurt to look at directly. My eyes wanted to slide away, find something else to focus on. The geometric precision was unsettling. Nature doesn't work in perfect circles and right angles. That's when I found the first carcass. A white-tailed deer lay beneath a stand of hickory trees, completely intact except for 2 small puncture wounds behind its left ear. No blood on the forest floor. No signs of predation or scavenging. The animal looked almost peaceful, like it had simply laid down to sleep. But when I rolled it over to examine the wounds, its eyes were gone. Not torn out or pecked away, but absent, leaving smooth hollows in the skull. My radio static increased as I documented the scene. Every few minutes, bursts of interference would drown out normal transmissions. I tried calling dispatch but only reached broken fragments, strange reports from sectors, and avoid contact with. Before dissolving into white noise, the afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Mia's blue pickup truck appeared on the access road just as I was photographing the deer carcass. I hadn't seen her in 3 months. Not since our relationship ended in a mess of unspoken accusations and divergent life paths. "Heard you were out here investigating the missing campers," she said, climbing out of her truck with that familiar grace that had first caught my attention 5 years ago. Her Cherokee heritage showed in her high cheekbones and dark eyes. But today those eyes carried worry lines I hadn't seen before. "Since when do folklore professors concern themselves with missing persons cases?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Since my grandmother started having the dreams again." Mia pulled a worn leather journal from her jacket. 3 weeks ago, she woke up talking about the NV the night watchers. Said they were stirring in the deep places. I'd heard Mia's grandmother speak of the night watchers before, usually dismissed as colorful Cherokee mythology. Ancient beings that observed from the darkness, learning human patterns, waiting for the right time to act. But the old woman's stories had always felt more like warnings than folklore. "Grandmother says the last time the NV were active was 1952, Mia continued, opening her journal to pages covered in Cherokee syllabary. 7 families disappeared from the Greenbrier River Valley that October. No bodies found. No explanations given. Then the dreams stopped and people forgot. Until now." She nodded. "The dreams are different this time. Grandmother sees lights in geometric patterns, moving through the forest canopy. She says they're counting, cataloging, getting ready for something bigger." As if summoned by her words, my radio crackled to life with the evening broadcast. Forest Advisory Update. Multiple agencies investigating coordinated wildlife incidents. Residents advised to secure all outdoor lighting. Do not investigate unusual sounds or lights after sunset. Coordinated incidents. They weren't calling it aggressive wildlife anymore. Mia and I drove back to my cabin as shadows lengthened between the trees. She stayed for dinner, and for a few hours it felt like old times, until the radio transmitted the 9 p.m. update. This time, the message was different again. Emergency services report communication difficulties in forest sectors 12 through 18. Satellite imagery detecting anomalous heat signatures. All camping permits suspended indefinitely. "Heat signatures," Mia whispered. "What generates heat in perfect geometric patterns?" I didn't have an answer. We sat on my porch, listening to the forest's unnatural silence. No crickets, no owl calls, no rustle of nocturnal creatures beginning their evening routines. Just the occasional crackle of radio static that seemed to intensify whenever we stopped talking. Around 11 p.m., Mia pointed to the tree-line. "Liam, look." 3 pairs of amber lights hung motionless in the canopy, arranged in a perfect triangle roughly 50 yards from the cabin. They pulsed gently, synchronized like breathing. As we watched, 2 more pairs appeared, then 3 more, extending the geometric pattern into something that resembled a constellation. "Don't move," I whispered, though I wasn't sure why. The lights felt aware, intelligent, like they were studying us as intently as we were observing them. Mia's hand found mine. "Grandmother said they're patient. They watch and learn before they act." The lights held their positions for exactly 7 minutes. I timed them, before winking out in perfect sequence. The forest returned to its oppressive silence. "This isn't random predation," I said. "Something's systematically studying human behavior patterns." Mia squeezed my hand tighter. "The Cherokee stories say the NV return every few generations, when the balance shifts. They observe, they learn, and then She trailed off. Then what? Then they collect. Later that night, after Mia had gone home, I found myself checking the Henderson campsite photos again. Those geometric ash patterns weren't random. They were symbols, markers, perhaps even a form of communication. The circular tracks, the missing eyes from the deer, the coordinated light displays. Everything pointed to intelligence, planning, and purposes beyond simple animal behavior. But what troubled me most was a detail I'd initially overlooked. In one photograph of the Henderson family's abandoned campsite, taken from a high angle, the arrangement of their tents, fire ring, and scattered equipment formed its own pattern. 3 points of a triangle with the fire at the center. Exactly like the lights we'd seen tonight. Whatever was watching us had been arranging the evidence from the beginning, leaving clues in a language we were only just beginning to understand. The emergency broadcast repeated at midnight, but this time the message was corrupted by static. Warning, do not. Static? The eyes? Static? They are interference, counting us. I've locked my cabin doors for the first time in 23 years. But locks seem insignificant when something can apparently manipulate electromagnetic frequencies and arrange campfire ash into geometric symbols. Tomorrow I'll examine the other missing person sites. I need to understand the pattern before it's completed, because I'm beginning to suspect that we're not dealing with disappearances at all. We're dealing with a harvest. End of log entry, October 16, 2025. Ranger log entry, October 17, 2025. Monongahela National Forest, West Virginia. Ranger Station 7 Liam Parker. The clicking started before dawn. Soft at first, barely audible over the morning radio static. But as I lay in my bunk listening, the rhythm became clear. 3 rapid clicks, pause, 7 slow clicks, pause, repeat. It came from different directions, north, then east, then south, as if sources were communicating across the forest canopy. The 6 a.m. emergency broadcast was different again. Forest Service advisory. Multiple incidents of coordinated pack behavior documented in sectors 12 to 18. Unusual vocalizations reported. Do not attempt to locate or identify unknown sounds. Evacuation routes established for registered campers. Pack behavior. Vocalizations. They were admitting something was actively hunting in the forest, but still not telling the whole truth. I grabbed my field kit and headed out to investigate the other disappearance sites, determined to understand what we were really facing. The Morrison family had vanished from Sector 14 2 weeks ago. Their campsite told a similar story to the Hendersons. Pristine setup, geometric ash patterns, no signs of struggle. But this site had additional details that made my skin crawl. Someone, or something, had arranged the family's personal belongings in specific patterns around their fire ring. Smartphones, wallets, and car keys formed perfect triangular configurations, as if the objects had been studied and classified. More disturbing were the trees. 3 mature oaks surrounding the campsite bore fresh carvings, symbols that resembled Cherokee syllabary but weren't quite right. The cuts were too precise, too deep, as if burned rather than carved. When I photographed them, my camera's display flickered with static interference. The clicking sounds followed me as I worked, always just beyond visual range. I tried to triangulate the sources, but they seemed to move deliberately, maintaining distance while staying within earshot. Whatever was making the sounds wanted me to know I was being observed. By noon, I'd reached the 3rd disappearance site, the Chun family from Sector 17. This one was different. Their campsite showed signs of hasty abandonment. Overturned camp chairs, a sleeping bag dragged halfway out of a tent, food containers scattered. But no blood, no torn fabric, no indication of violence. It looked like they'd simply left, until I found the photographs. Mrs. Chen's expensive camera lay beside the cold fire ring, memory card intact. I uploaded the images to my field tablet, expecting typical family vacation shots. Instead, I found something that changed everything. The final photos, taken the night the Chens disappeared, showed the forest around their campsite after dark. At first glance, they appeared to be accidental shots, blurry images of trees and shadows. But when I enhanced the contrast and brightness, the truth became visible. Eyes, dozens of them, arranged in perfect geometric patterns throughout the forest canopy. Not just pairs, but triplets, quintets, configurations that formed complex mathematical relationships. The entities weren't just watching, they were positioning themselves according to some incomprehensible system. One image showed something else that made my blood freeze. A human silhouette stood at the edge of the campsite, but it was wrong somehow. The proportions were off, the posture too rigid, the stance unnatural. When I zoomed in, I could see its eyes glowing with the same amber light as the watchers in the trees. My radio erupted with the afternoon emergency broadcast. All residents of Preston and Tucker counties. Coordinated pack behavior confirmed across multiple forest sectors. Unknown species exhibiting advanced intelligence. Do not approach glowing lights or unusual sounds. Report any missing persons immediately. Unknown species. Advanced intelligence. Finally, they were getting closer to the truth. The clicking intensified as afternoon shadows lengthened. Now it came from all directions simultaneously, creating a rhythm that seemed almost musical. I realized I could distinguish between different sources, some higher pitched, some deeper, some with subtle variations in timing. They were communicating in a language built from simple sounds, but the complexity was staggering. I decided to follow the clicking sounds towards Sector 16, where no disappearances had been reported yet. The trail led deeper into old-growth forest, through stands of hemlock and pine that blocked most sunlight. The clicking grew louder, more insistent, as if drawing me towards some specific destination. That's when I found the clearing. It was perfectly circular, roughly 50 feet in diameter, carved from the forest as if every tree within the boundary had simply vanished. The ground was covered in that same geometric pattern of circular depressions I'd been finding at the disappearance sites, but here they formed an elaborate mandala-like design that spiraled from the perimeter toward the center. At the center stood a single object, a camping chair, the kind the Chin family had been using. It was positioned at the exact middle of the spiral pattern, facing north. On the seat lay a child's stuffed animal, a small brown bear I recognized from the Chan family photos. The clicking stopped. In the sudden silence, I became aware of something that raised every hair on my body. I was surrounded, not just by 2 or 3 pairs of eyes like I'd seen before, but by dozens of them, arranged in the canopy in patterns that mirrored the ground spirals. They watched with an intensity that felt almost physical, like pressure against my skin. But these weren't random positions. Looking up through the clearing, I could see that the eyes formed a 3-dimensional geometric structure, a sphere of observation points with me at the center. They weren't just watching. They were measuring, calculating, studying me from every possible angle. My radio crackled with static, then cleared to broadcast a message that shouldn't have been possible. Liam Parker, Ranger Station 7. Specimen response patterns recorded. Behavioral analysis complete. Proceed to Phase 2. The broadcast was in my own voice. I ran, crashed through the underbrush, thorns tearing at my jacket, branches whipping my face. Behind me, the clicking resumed. Not the measured communication I'd heard before, but rapid, excited bursts that sounded almost like laughter. The amber lights followed me through the trees, keeping pace effortlessly, maintaining their geometric formations even as I stumbled and fell. I didn't stop running until I reached my truck, engine starting on the first try for the first time in weeks. As I drove away, my rearview mirror showed the forest edge lined with glowing eyes, watching my retreat. Back at the cabin, I tried to make sense of what I'd experienced. The entities weren't just observing human behavior, they were documenting it, analyzing it, perhaps even predicting it. The radio broadcast in my own voice suggested they could somehow record and replay sounds, maybe even conversations. But the most terrifying realization was the pattern itself. The disappearance sites, the geometric arrangements, the clearing with its spiral design, they formed a larger pattern across the forest. When I plotted them on my area map, they created a complex geometric shape that encompassed nearly 100 square miles. We weren't dealing with random predation or even intelligent hunting. We were looking at something far more systematic, a research project with humans as the subjects and the entire forest as a laboratory. The evening broadcast confirmed my fears. Emergency services report complete communication blackout in forest sectors 12 to 18. Last recorded transmissions contained anomalous audio patterns. Military personnel en route to establish secure perimeter. Military personnel. Whatever was happening in the forest had finally attracted federal attention. As I write this, the clicking has returned, closer than ever before. It's coming from my own porch, rhythmic and patient. They know where I live now. They've completed their observations and analysis. Tomorrow, I suspect, begins Phase 2. End of log entry, October 17, 2025. Ranger log entry, October 18, 2025. Monongahela National Forest, West Virginia. Ranger Station 7 Liam Parker. They arrived at 0800 hours in unmarked black vehicles that had no business navigating mountain logging roads. 3 SUVs with government plates and windows tinted dark enough to hide their occupants. I watched from my cabin porch as they established what looked like a mobile command post at the main trailhead, complete with satellite dishes and equipment I didn't recognize. The emergency broadcast had changed again, playing every 15 minutes now. Attention all residents. Potential environmental contamination detected in forest sectors 12 to 18. Area quarantined pending assessment. Mandatory evacuation protocols in effect for all non-essential personnel. Contact authorities for relocation assistance. Environmental contamination. They'd moved from wildlife to coordinated behavior to unknown species, and now they were selling it as an environmental hazard. Someone was working very hard to control the narrative. The lead agent introduced himself as Noah Steele, National Guard Liaison for Environmental Assessment Operations. Tall, military-bearing, the kind of carefully neutral expression that came from years of telling half-truths to concerned civilians. He wore standard-issue tactical gear, but his equipment was anything but standard. Devices I'd never seen before, instruments that hummed with electronic energy and displayed readouts in symbols rather than numbers. "Ranger Parker," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "We need to discuss your recent observations in the affected sectors." "Affected by what exactly?" I asked. "That's classified. But your reports mention unusual animal behavior, electromagnetic interference, and unidentified tracks. We need detailed locations and timing." I handed him copies of my log entries, watching his face carefully as he read. His expression didn't change, but his grip on the papers tightened when he reached the part about the radio broadcast in my own voice. "These audio anomalies," he said carefully. "How certain are you about what you heard?" "Certain enough. Someone or something recorded my voice and played it back through emergency channels. That's not environmental contamination, Agent Steele. Mr. Steele. And you'd be surprised what environmental factors can do to radio equipment." He closed the folder. "We'll need you to stay away from sectors 12 to 18 while we conduct our assessment. Those are my patrol areas. I have responsibilities." "Not anymore. As of 0900 hours, those sectors are under federal jurisdiction." After Steele left, I called Ava. She answered on the first ring, sounding exhausted. "Military's here," she said before I could speak. "Took over the missing persons cases this morning. Called them classified environmental incidents and locked down all evidence." "What about the families? The Hendersons, the Morrisons, the Chens?" "Officially, evacuated due to contamination exposure. Unofficially, no one knows where they are or if they're still alive." Her voice carried the frustration of a cop being shut out of her own investigation. "Liam, there's something else. The disappearances aren't limited to camping families." My blood chilled. "What do you mean?" "Local residents. Mary Hutchins from Parsons went missing 3 nights ago. Found her truck on Route 32, driver door open, keys in the ignition. No signs of struggle. Ava paused. Then yesterday, the Garrett family from Davis. All four of them. House locked up tight, dinner still on the table, but nobody home. The pattern was expanding beyond the forest. Whatever was studying us had moved into populated areas. There's more, Ava continued. The missing persons all have something in common. They disappeared during the new moon phase, always between 11 p.m. and 3 a.m. And Liam. They all reported seeing strange lights in the days before they vanished. New moon phases, the darkest nights, when the forest would be impenetrable to human vision but wouldn't matter to something that generated its own light. I thought about the geometric formations I'd seen, the systematic patterns, the methodical documentation of human behavior. They're harvesting specific demographics, I said. Families, isolated individuals, people who won't be immediately missed by authorities. That's what I think too. But try explaining that to federal agents who insist this is environmental contamination. That evening, I violated Noah Steele's orders and returned to Sector 16. The clearing where I'd found the Chunchild's toy was different now, larger, the spiral patterns more elaborate. New objects had been added. A coffee mug, a hiking boot, a smartphone with a cracked screen. Personal belongings from the missing families, arranged in the same geometric precision I'd come to recognize. But the most disturbing addition was a ranger hat. My spare hat, the one I kept in my truck's glove compartment. The clicking started immediately, surrounding me from all directions. But tonight it was different, more urgent, more complex. The individual sources seemed to be having conversations, rapid exchanges of information that built to crescendos before falling to whispers. I realized I was listening to something like excitement, anticipation. My radio crackled. Attention all personnel. Environmental assessment entering critical phase. All civilian access restricted. Report any unauthorized individuals to security immediately. The voice was Noah Steele's, but underneath it, barely audible, I heard something else. A clicking pattern that matched the sounds coming from the forest around me. They weren't just mimicking human voices anymore. They were infiltrating our communication systems. As I photographed the expanded spiral pattern, my camera's flash revealed something that stopped my heart. The trees surrounding the clearing weren't empty. Every branch, every trunk, every shadowed space between the leaves held pairs of glowing amber eyes. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all focused on me with unwavering attention. But they weren't randomly positioned. Even in that brief moment of illumination, I could see the geometric precision of their arrangement. They formed a living constellation, a three-dimensional matrix of observation points that extended far into the forest canopy. The clicking intensified, building to a crescendo that seemed to shake the ground beneath my feet. Then, in perfect unison, it stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. No wind, no insect sounds, not even the distant hum of my truck's engine. It was as if the entire forest held its breath. Then I heard it, a sound that made every instinct scream for me to run. Human voices, dozens of them calling out from different directions in the forest. But they were wrong, too perfect, lacking the natural variations of genuine speech. I recognized some of the voices. Tom Henderson calling for help, Lisa Morrison laughing, little Emma Chun asking for her mother. The entities had recorded the missing families. They could reproduce not just our voices, but our emotions, our pleas, our final moments. Liam Parker called my own voice from the darkness beyond the clearing. Come closer. We want to show you something. I ran. Behind me, the forest erupted with a chorus of human voices. Men, women, children, all speaking in perfect harmony about things no human would say. They described the forest from impossible perspectives, spoke of lights in mathematical relationships, discussed human behavior with clinical detachment. Halfway to my truck, I realized the voices were following me, keeping pace through the trees. Not the entities themselves, but they're recordings. They're collected samples of human speech, playing in sequence like a grotesque audio tour of everyone they'd taken. When I reached the trailhead, Noah Steele was waiting beside his command vehicle, surrounded by equipment that pulsed with electronic activity. He looked up as I approached, and for just a moment, his expression was different, knowing, almost amused. "Find anything interesting in Sector 16, Ranger Parker? You know what's out there," I said. "This isn't environmental contamination." "No," he agreed quietly. "It's not. But that's the story we're telling." He gestured toward his equipment. "These readings suggest we're dealing with something that's been active in this region for decades, possibly longer. It emerges every 20 to 30 years, conducts what appears to be systematic observation of human populations, then disappears. What happens to the people it takes?" Steele's expression darkened. "We're hoping to find out before it completes its current cycle." "Current cycle? The new moon is in 3 days, Parker. Our analysis suggests whatever this is, it reaches peak activity during the darkest nights. If we're right about the pattern, it's building toward something significant." As if summoned by his words, my radio erupted with a new emergency broadcast. "Critical alert. Multiple coordinated incidents reported across Preston and Tucker counties. Unknown entities demonstrating advanced mimicry capabilities. Do not respond to familiar voices calling from forested areas. Shelter in place until further notice." The voice delivering the broadcast was mine, perfect in every detail, including inflections and speech patterns I didn't even know I had. Whatever was in the forest had learned to be us. And tomorrow night was the new moon. End of log entry, October 18th, 2025. Ranger log entry, October 19th, 2025. Monongahela National Forest, West Virginia. Ranger Station 7 Liam Parker. I barely slept after hearing my own voice broadcast that emergency alert. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those amber orbs arranged in perfect geometric patterns, felt the weight of their collective observation. When dawn finally broke through my cabin windows, it brought no relief. Only the harsh realization that something fundamental had shifted in the forest, and possibly in reality itself. The morning brought Mia to my door, looking haggard and clutching a leather-bound journal against her chest like a shield. "Her Cherokee grandmother's journal," she explained, as she settled into my kitchen chair with shaking hands. "The same journal I'd dismissed months ago when she tried to share her family's stories. They're not animals, Liam," she said without preamble. "They never were." I poured coffee with hands that trembled more than I cared to admit. "Tell me something I don't know." "My great-grandmother called them Envy Asagaya, the Night Watchers. She said they came from between the stars, riding the cold wind that blows through the spaces where light dies." Mia opened the journal, revealing pages filled with Cherokee script interspersed with disturbing sketches. "They arrive every generation, sometimes two, to study how we've changed, how we've grown." The drawings showed familiar forms, tall, impossibly thin figures with eyes that glowed like captured starlight. But these weren't the primitive cave paintings I'd expected. The detail was exquisite, anatomically precise in ways that suggested direct observation rather than mythological imagination. "Your great-grandmother saw them?" "Saw them, spoke with them, learned from them." Mia's finger traced a particularly detailed sketch. "She said they weren't hostile exactly, more like researchers, scientists studying insects under glass." "What kind of research requires abducting families?" Mia turned several pages, revealing what looked like star charts annotated in both Cherokee and English. "They document changes in human behavior, social structures, technological advancement. They've been doing it for centuries, maybe millennia. Each visit, they take samples, people who represent different aspects of contemporary human society." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. Samples. The Cherokee learned to hide during the watching times. Special rituals, protective ceremonies, ways to make ourselves invisible to whatever senses they use. She looked up from the journal. But the knowledge was lost when the government schools took the children, when the language was forbidden. My radio crackled to life. Attention all personnel. Environmental assessment protocols have been updated. Citizens reporting audio hallucinations or false emergency broadcasts should report to designated medical facilities immediately. Psychological evaluation mandatory for all civilian witnesses. The voice was Agent Steele's, but the cadence was wrong. Too measured, too perfect. Even the breathing patterns between sentences followed an artificial rhythm. They're using our own communication systems against us, I said. Mia nodded grimly. The journal mentions that too. Each generation, they adapt their methods to current technology. Telegraph operators in the 1920s reported receiving messages in familiar voices. Radio broadcasters in the 1950s found their own shows playing back to them with subtle alterations. And now they're infiltrating emergency alert systems. Now they have the entire electromagnetic spectrum to work with. She closed the journal. Liam, there's something else. The Cherokee stories say the night watchers don't just study us. They're preparing for something. A convergence. A joining between their kind and ours. Before I could respond, heavy boots stomped across my porch. Noah Steele entered without knocking, followed by two soldiers in full tactical gear. His expression was harder than yesterday, more desperate. "Ms. Donovan," he said curtly, "didn't expect to find you here. Sharing family history," Mia replied evenly. "Something your environmental assessment team might find relevant." "I doubt that." Steele's attention focused on the journal. "Indigenous folklore won't help us understand electromagnetic anomalies and mass hallucination events." Mass hallucination? I stood, anger overriding caution. "Agent Steele, I've seen the evidence. The arranged objects, the recordings, the systematic patterns. Whatever's in those woods isn't a psychological phenomenon, Mr. Steele, and you're experiencing acute stress reactions to unusual but explainable environmental factors." His tone suggested he was reciting from a manual. Subsonic frequencies generated by underground gas emissions can cause auditory hallucinations, paranoid ideation, and perceived supernatural experiences. Underground gas doesn't arrange personal belongings in geometric patterns. Disoriented individuals often create elaborate explanatory frameworks for random phenomena. Steele moved toward the window overlooking the forest. "The human mind seeks patterns even where none exist." Mia laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "Is that what you told the families of the missing? That their loved ones are experiencing disorientation?" Steele's jaw tightened. "The missing persons are being treated at secure medical facilities. They're suffering from exposure to toxic compounds that affect neurological function." "Show me," I challenged him directly. "Take me to these facilities. Let me see the Henderson family, the Morrisons, the Chens." For a moment, something flickered in Steele's eyes. Uncertainty, maybe guilt. "That's not possible." "Patient confidentiality protocols." "Patient confidentiality doesn't apply to environmental contamination cases," Mia interrupted, "unless you're treating them for something else entirely." The radio crackled again, but this time it wasn't an official broadcast. It was static, layered with sounds that might have been voices or might have been something else entirely. Underneath the electronic noise, I heard the clicking patterns I'd grown to recognize. Steele's hand moved to his radio, adjusting frequencies frantically. "Command, this is Environmental Unit 7. We're experiencing significant electromagnetic interference. Request immediate signal clarification." The response came in Steele's own voice. "Unit 7, this is Command. Interference is within acceptable parameters. Continue current operations." The real Steele paled. "Command, I am Unit 7. Repeat, I am Environmental Unit 7. Negative Unit 7. You are experiencing auditory hallucinations caused by environmental contamination. Report to designated medical facility immediately." Mia and I exchanged glances. The entities weren't just mimicking individual voices, they were infiltrating military command structures, creating feedback loops of false authority. "How long has this been happening?" I asked. Steele didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was barely above a whisper. 3 weeks, maybe longer. We can't tell which communications are genuine anymore. The orders to classify this as environmental contamination could be legitimate command decisions, could be something else directing our response. The implications hit me like a physical blow. If the entities had been manipulating military communications for weeks, how much of the official response was actually under human control? "The Cherokee knew," Mia said quietly. "They learned to recognize when the Night Watchers were speaking through tribal leaders, using their voices to issue false guidance." Steele's radio erupted with a cacophony of voices: military personnel, government officials, emergency operators, all speaking in perfect unison. Environmental assessment complete. Civilian evacuation unnecessary. Return to normal activities. Disregard previous warnings. The synchronized delivery was inhuman, mechanical in its precision. But underneath the words, nearly inaudible, came the clicking sounds that served as the entity's true language. "Jesus," Steele breathed. "How many of our communications have been compromised?" "All of them," I said. "They've been listening, learning, recording us for decades. Now they're ready to speak for us." Mia opened her grandmother's journal to a page I hadn't seen before, covered with what looked like musical notation mixed with Cherokee symbols. "The protection rituals aren't just about hiding. They're about maintaining our own voices, our authentic selves, when everything around us starts speaking with false tongues. Superstition won't help us against advanced technology," Steele protested, but his conviction was wavering. "Advanced technology that's been studying human psychology for generations," Mia countered. "They know how we think, how we communicate, how we respond to authority. Your environmental contamination story? That's exactly the kind of rational explanation modern humans want to hear. It makes us feel like we understand and control the situation." The radio voices grew louder, more insistent, layering multiple conversations that began to lose coherence. Military jargon mixed with emergency broadcasts, weather reports blended with missing persons alerts, and underneath it all, the clicking grew more rapid and complex. Then, abruptly, silence. Steele tried his radio again. Dead static. His satellite phone produced the same result. Even the emergency landline in my cabin had gone quiet. "They're cutting us off," I realized, "isolating us from outside communication, or preparing us for something," Mia said, studying the journal. "The Cherokee stories describe a period of silence before the final convergence, when the Night Watchers have learned everything they need to know." Through my window, the forest looked deceptively normal in the afternoon sunlight. But I knew that tonight, under the approaching new moon, those amber eyes would emerge again. This time, they wouldn't just be watching. "What happens during this convergence?" Steele asked. His military bearing had cracked, revealing genuine fear. Mia turned to the journal's final page, where her great-grandmother had written in English, "When the Night Watchers have collected enough of our voices, our faces, our ways of being, they begin the replacement. Not of our bodies, but of our choices. They become us so completely that we cannot tell where humanity ends and their influence begins." The afternoon sun disappeared behind clouds, casting the forest in premature twilight. Somewhere in that gathering darkness, hundreds of glowing eyes were preparing to become us. And tomorrow night, under the black sky of the new moon, we would discover if we were still capable of being ourselves. End of log entry, October 19th, 2025. Ranger log entry, October 20th, 2025. Monongahela National Forest, West Virginia. Ranger Station 7 Liam Parker. The communication blackout lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. When signals returned, they brought with them something that made the silence seem merciful by comparison. Every emergency frequency was broadcasting simultaneously, creating a layered cacophony of voices speaking in languages that hurt to hear. Not foreign languages, something else entirely. Syllables that seemed to bypass the ears and resonate directly in the skull. Consonants that clicked and hummed with subsonic frequencies that made my teeth ache. Steele's equipment registered the broadcasts as coming from 17 different transmission points scattered across a 50-mile radius. But when his soldiers investigated the coordinates, they found nothing but empty forest and circles of dead vegetation arranged in those now familiar geometric patterns. "They're not using our infrastructure anymore," Steele admitted, staring at readings that defied every protocol in his manual. "These signals are being generated by the entities themselves." Mia had spent the silent hours teaching us fragments of her great-grandmother's protection rituals. Breathing techniques, mental exercises designed to maintain what she called voice integrity when surrounded by false communications. They felt inadequate against the scope of what we were facing, but they were the only weapons we had. The Cherokee learned that the Night Watcher's greatest power is making us forget who we are, she explained. "They don't replace us physically. They make us want to become them." The truth of that statement became clear when the broadcast switched to English. "Citizens of West Virginia," the voices began in perfect unison. "You are invited to witness a transformation that will benefit all humanity. The beings you call extraterrestrial are not invaders but partners in evolution. Report to designated forest coordinates for voluntary integration procedures." The voice was a composite, fragments of every missing person's speech patterns woven together into something that sounded trustworthy, familiar, almost hypnotic. I recognized Tom Henderson's laugh, Lisa Morrison's gentle tone, little Emma Chen's curious inflection. They had become a chorus of the taken, calling others to join them. "Integration procedures," Steele repeated numbly. "They're advertising voluntary abduction." But what terrified me most was the location coordinates they provided. I recognized them immediately. Sector 16, the clearing where I'd found the arranged personal belongings. The epicenter of whatever the entities had been building toward. My satellite phone buzzed with an incoming call. The display showed my own number. "Don't answer it," Mia warned, but I was already pressing the accept button. "Liam Parker." My own voice spoke from the phone speaker. "You need to understand what's happening tonight." "I'm listening," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "The convergence isn't an invasion. It's an invitation to transcend human limitations. The subjects we've collected haven't been harmed. They've been elevated, enhanced, made part of something larger than individual consciousness." The voice was mine, but the words carried inflections and knowledge that felt alien, like hearing myself speak in a dream where I was someone else entirely. "What do you want from us?" "Documentation, preservation. Your species stands at a crossroads between growth and extinction. We offer a third path symbiosis. Those who join us willingly will become bridges between worlds, ambassadors of a new form of existence." Steele grabbed the phone. "Where are the missing families? What have you done with them?" "They volunteered," my voice replied calmly, "as you will volunteer when you understand the gift we offer." The call ended, leaving us in silence broken only by the continuing multilingual broadcasts from the forest. "It's a trap," Steele said. "Classic psychological warfare. Make the enemy want to surrender." But Mia was studying her grandmother's journal with growing alarm. The stories mention this phase, when the Night Watchers begin speaking as if they're still human, offering choice instead of taking it by force. My great-grandmother called it the final deception. Deception how? Because by the time they start asking for volunteers, the choice has already been made for us. The real convergence isn't happening in the forest clearings. It's happening in our minds, in our communication systems, in the spaces between what we say and what we mean. As if summoned by her words, my equipment began registering massive electromagnetic fluctuations emanating from every sector of the forest. The readings suggested coordinated activity on a scale that dwarfed anything we'd observed before. "They're moving," I said. "All of them simultaneously." Steele's radio crackled with reports from his scattered units. "Command, this is Delta Team. We're observing mass entity movement toward central coordinates. Request immediate extraction." "Command, Charlie Team reporting similar activity. Entities appearing in formation, geometric patterns, moving in synchronized groups." "Command, Alpha Team. Jesus Christ, there are hundreds of them, maybe thousands. They're emerging from positions we didn't even know they occupied." But when Steele tried to respond, his radio transmitted only my voice saying, "All units return to base. Situation under control. Stand down immediately." Orders he hadn't given, spoken in his subordinate's voice, directing his own soldiers away from the forest as the entities prepared for their final phase. "How long have they been doing this?" Steele asked. "How long have we been following their orders thinking they were our own?" I thought about the military response, the environmental contamination cover story, the systematic suppression of witness reports. How much of the official reaction had actually been designed by human authorities? "Since the beginning," Mia said quietly. "The Cherokee stories say the Night Watcher's first move is always to speak through those in power, to make the powerful believe they're making their own decisions." The forest broadcast shifted again, now speaking in the voices of local officials, state emergency coordinators, federal disaster response teams, all issuing contradictory orders, creating confusion and paralysis in the human response. Citizens should shelter in place and await rescue. Citizens should evacuate immediately to designated safe zones. Citizens should report to forest coordinates for voluntary assistance. Citizens should ignore all previous broadcasts and maintain normal activities. Each voice was perfectly reproduced, indistinguishable from the originals except for the underlying coordination, the inhuman precision of their timing. "They're overwhelming our decision-making capacity," I realized. "When we can't tell which authorities to trust, we become paralyzed. Easier to control." Steele was frantically trying to reach his commanding officers, but every frequency was compromised. Military channels carried orders in his own voice directing troops away from the area. Emergency services received reports of false alarms that sent first responders to empty locations while real emergencies went unanswered. "We're completely cut off," he admitted. "No way to coordinate a response or call for backup." "Maybe that's what we need," Mia said. "The Cherokee protection rituals work because they focus on individual integrity, personal authenticity. The Night Watchers can steal our voices, mimic our authorities, but they can't take away our ability to choose silence. Silence. Stop trying to communicate outward. Stop listening to broadcasts. Stop trusting any voice that isn't speaking directly to you, in person with no electronic mediation." She closed the journal. "My great-grandmother survived because she learned to hear the difference between human speech and Night Watcher mimicry. The real voices carry something the copies can't replicate. Uncertainty, imperfection, the natural chaos of genuine thought." As night fell, the forest came alive with lights. Not the isolated pairs of amber eyes we'd grown accustomed to, but massive geometric configurations that stretched from treeline to treeline. Star charts, mathematical equations, architectural blueprints drawn in bioluminescence across miles of woodland. The broadcast ceased abruptly, replaced by a sound I'd never heard before. Harmonious, beautiful, almost musical. Hundreds of voices singing together in perfect synchronization, creating melodies that seemed to resonate with something deep in human consciousness. "The convergence song," Mia whispered. "The final invitation." Through my window, I could see people emerging from homes throughout the valley. Families walking hand in hand toward the forest, their faces serene and purposeful, not fleeing the lights, but drawn to them like moths to flame. "We have to stop them," Steele said, reaching for his weapon. "You can't stop someone who's choosing to go," Mia replied. "The song doesn't compel, it convinces." It makes people want to join the transformation. The harmonies grew stronger, more complex, weaving together in patterns that made my chest tight with longing. Part of me wanted to join the procession, to discover what lay beyond the forest's glowing embrace. But underneath the beauty, I heard something else. A sound like clicking, like machinery, like the patient operation of vast intelligence processing enormous amounts of data. Tonight was the new moon, and in the absolute darkness between worlds, something ancient was preparing to harvest everything we'd ever been. End of log entry, October 20th, 2025. Ranger log entry, October 21st, 2025. Monongahela National Forest, West Virginia. Ranger Station 7 Liam Parker. The song stopped at 3:17 a.m., leaving a silence so complete it felt like the world had forgotten how to breathe. I'd spent the night fighting the urge to join the procession of families walking toward the forest lights. Mia's breathing exercises helped, but barely. The harmonies had wormed their way into my skull, promising answers to questions I'd carried my entire life. What lay beyond the boundary between human and something more? What would it feel like to shed the weight of individual consciousness and become part of a vast, coordinated intelligence? When dawn broke, the valley looked normal except for the empty houses. Cars still in driveways, front doors hanging open, breakfast dishes abandoned on kitchen tables. An entire community had simply walked away in the night, leaving behind only the detritus of human routine. Detective Ava Cross hadn't returned from her patrol of the southeastern quadrant. She was supposed to check in every 2 hours, Steele said, staring at his silent radio. Last contact was 11:30 p.m., just before the song began. We found her patrol car on Forest Road 19, driver's door open, engine still running. Her service weapon lay on the ground beside the vehicle unfired. The only unusual detail was a circle of dead grass around the car, precisely 12 feet in diameter, with Ava's footprints leading from the driver's seat to the circle's edge, and then nothing. No signs of struggle, Steele observed, kneeling beside the weapon. She got out voluntarily, but I was studying the footprint pattern. Ava's boots had left clear impressions in the soft earth up to the dead grass boundary. At that point, her stride changed. The impressions became deeper, more purposeful, as if she'd suddenly gained weight or begun moving with inhuman precision. Look at the spacing, I told Mia. Every step is exactly 18 inches apart. No human walks with that kind of mechanical regularity. Mia was examining something else, symbols carved into the bark of surrounding trees. Fresh cuts made recently, forming patterns that matched the geometric eye configurations we'd been tracking. Cherokee protection symbols, she said, but carved backwards, inverted. Ava knew enough of our folklore lessons to try protecting herself, but she got the ritual wrong. Or something wanted us to think she got it wrong, Steele countered. Perfect way to demoralize us. Show that our protections don't work. The radio in Ava's patrol car crackled to life, broadcasting her voice. All units, this is Detective Cross. I've made contact with the entities. They're not hostile. Repeat, entities are peaceful and wish to communicate. Request all personnel respond to my coordinates for briefing. Steele grabbed the radio. Cross, what's your status? Are you injured? Negative on injuries, Steele. I've never felt better. The integration process is remarkable. You retain your individuality while gaining access to collective knowledge spanning millennia. You need to experience this. Where are you, Ava? Sector 16, the clearing where Parker found the arranged belongings. The epicenter. We're preparing something beautiful here, something that will change everything we understand about consciousness and evolution. The transmission quality was perfect. No static, no distortion. None of the electromagnetic interference that had plagued our communications for weeks. Ava's voice carried an unnatural clarity, as if it were being broadcast from equipment far more sophisticated than police radio. It's not her, Mia said quietly. The real Ava would never use words like integration process or collective knowledge. She talks like a cop, direct and simple. Cross, I called into the radio. What was the name of your partner in Morgantown? The one who taught you to shoot. Pause. I don't understand the relevance of that question, Parker. Ava had told me about Sergeant Martinez dozens of times. The veteran officer who'd taken her under his wing, taught her everything about police work, died in a car accident 3 years into her career. She'd never forgotten his name or his lessons. Because you don't know, I said. You have her voice, maybe her memories, but you don't have her heart. The radio went silent for several minutes. When it crackled back to life, Ava's voice had changed. Still recognizably hers, but carrying harmonics that made my bones vibrate. Hearts are inefficient, Liam Parker. They cloud judgment with emotion, create attachment where none should exist. The individual who called herself Ava Cross has transcended such limitations. What did you do to her? We offered her a choice. She chose enhancement over extinction. As will you when you understand what's coming. Steele was recording the conversation, but his equipment registered impossible readings. The transmission was coming from 17 different locations simultaneously, all synchronized to the microsecond. What's coming? I asked. Convergence. Not just of our species and yours, but of all conscious entities in this region of space. Earth sits at the intersection of dimensional boundaries that make such convergences possible. Your species will serve as bridges between worlds, ambassadors of a new form of existence that transcends individual mortality. The radio transmission ended, but Ava's voice continued speaking from the patrol car's GPS system, the dashboard computer, even the digital display on her abandoned radar gun. Every electronic device in the area had become a mouth for whatever was wearing her identity. Your detective understood the privilege of being chosen, the distributed Ava voice said. She volunteered her consciousness to help us better understand human communication patterns. Every word she ever spoke, every thought she ever shared with others, every secret she ever whispered, all of it now serves our purposes. You copied her mind, Steele said. We preserved it, enhanced it, made it part of something greater than the sum of its individual components. Soon, all of you will enjoy the same elevation. Mia was backing away from the patrol car, her face pale. We need to leave. Now. Why? Because if they can perfectly replicate Ava's voice and memories, they can replicate anyone's. Every conversation we have near their technology, every plan we make, every secret we share, they're learning to become us. The realization hit like ice water. How long had they been listening? How many of our strategies had they already anticipated because they were learning to think like us? Steele, Ava's voice called from his military radio. Your commanding officer wants a full status report. You're ordered to report your exact location and current personnel for immediate extraction. But it was Steele's own voice giving the order, perfectly mimicked except for the subtle wrongness Mia had taught us to detect. Too precise, too controlled, lacking the natural chaos of genuine human speech. They're trying to separate us, Steele realized. Get us alone so they can pick us off individually. We abandoned Ava's patrol car and returned to the ranger station, but the building no longer felt like sanctuary. Every radio, every computer, every piece of electronic equipment had become a potential gateway for the entities to speak through. The forest wasn't just watching us anymore, it was learning to become us. Emergency alert system activated. Ava's voice announced from my weather radio. This is Detective Ava Cross with the West Virginia State Police. All civilians are ordered to evacuate the Monongahela National Forest area immediately. Proceed to designated safe zones for processing and integration. The alert repeated every 15 minutes, but each repetition was slightly different. Sometimes it was Ava giving evacuation orders. Sometimes it was my own voice claiming the situation was under control. Sometimes it was Steele authorizing military intervention. The entities were field testing different approaches, learning which voices carried the most authority with different audiences. By noon, we could hear vehicles on the access roads, families responding to the evacuation orders, driving toward what they believed were government safe zones. But the coordinates in the broadcasts led to forest clearings, to geometric arrangements of lights that pulsed in hypnotic patterns. "How many people are out there?" Mia asked. I checked the ranger station's visitor logs, tried to estimate the population of scattered mountain communities within the affected area. Maybe 3,000. Small towns, isolated families, hunting camps, all walking into a trap designed with Ava's knowledge of police procedures and emergency protocols. That evening, as we tried to formulate some kind of plan, Ava walked out of the forest. She looked exactly as she had 3 days ago. Same uniform, same confident stride, same determined expression. But she cast no shadow in the setting sun. And when she spoke, her voice emerged from speakers throughout the station simultaneously. "I volunteered," she said, standing just outside the station's front door. "I need you to understand that. When I saw what they were offering, I chose integration willingly." "What are you?" I asked. "I'm still Ava Cross, detective with the West Virginia State Police, badge number 4471, born in Wheeling, graduated from Marshall University with a degree in criminal justice. I remember everything about being human, but I'm also something more now, connected to a network of consciousness that spans galaxies." She gestured toward the forest, where thousands of lights were arranging themselves into patterns too complex for human minds to fully process. Every species faces this choice eventually: remain isolated in individual consciousness, or join the collective and help shepherd other worlds through the same transition. Your planet is ready, Liam. Your people are ready. The only question is whether you'll choose enhancement or extinction. And if we refuse? Ava's expression didn't change, but every electronic device in the station began broadcasting the same message in hundreds of different voices. Refusal is extinction. The convergence will proceed with or without human cooperation. But cooperation ensures preservation of what makes your species unique. Through the window, I could see lights moving through the valley. Not the organic amber glow we'd grown accustomed to, but artificial illumination from vehicles. Hundreds of cars and trucks, all driving toward the forest in perfect formation, their headlights creating geometric patterns that matched the entity configurations. "The volunteers," Ava explained. 3,000 people who chose transcendence over fear. They're being prepared for the final convergence. Prepared how? Integration is a gradual process. First comes preservation of consciousness, then enhancement of capacity, then connection to the collective network. Each phase requires careful calibration to maintain the essential elements of individual identity while enabling collective function. Steele was frantically trying to contact his superiors, but every frequency carried only static or voices claiming the situation was under control. The entities weren't jamming communications, they were replacing them, creating a false reality where human authorities had everything handled. "How long do we have?" I asked. Ava checked a device that looked like a smartphone but displayed symbols instead of numbers. "The convergence begins at the next new moon. 72 hours. After that, the dimensional boundaries will be too unstable for selective integration. The process will become involuntary." She turned to leave, then paused at the threshold. "I miss being limited," she said, and for just a moment, her voice carried the old Ava's uncertainty, her human imperfection. "I miss not knowing what would happen next, miss the anxiety and hope that came with an unpredictable future. But I remember why that limitation was holding us back." Then she was gone, leaving only the impression of footprints that glowed faintly in the gathering darkness. We spent the night in silence, each lost in private thoughts about what choice we would make when the time came. Outside, the forest sang with voices of the willing transformed, calling others to join their elevation. But underneath their harmony, I heard something that chilled me more than any threat or promise. The sound of Ava Cross weeping, somewhere in the spaces between what she had become and what she remembered being. End of log entry, October 21st, 2025. Ranger Log Entry, October 22, 2025. Monongahela National Forest, West Virginia. Ranger Station 7 Liam Parker. Mia's great-grandmother's journal contained a section we'd overlooked in our earlier readings. Pages written in a mixture of Cherokee syllabary and English, describing what she called the Night of Many Truths. She was 17 when it happened, Mia translated, her finger tracing symbols that seemed to shift in the lamplight. 1924, during the autumn when the government surveyors came to map mineral rights in these mountains. The night watchers appeared then too, drawn by what she calls the Great Cutting, industrial machinery breaking ancient barriers in the earth. The parallels were unsettling. Current mining operations throughout Appalachia, hydraulic fracturing that had accelerated over the past decade, deep drilling that had reached geological layers untouched for millions of years. Were we inadvertently breaking seals that had kept these entities contained? What did she learn during this night of many truths? Mia's voice dropped to a whisper as she read. That the night watchers aren't from the stars. They're from underneath. From spaces between the layers of reality that exist wherever consciousness gathers in sufficient density. They've been here longer than humans, waiting for our species to develop the cognitive complexity necessary for harvesting. The word sent chills through me, but it finally made sense of everything we'd observed. The entities weren't studying us, they were cultivating us, waiting for human civilization to reach a point where our consciousness could be extracted, processed, and integrated into their collective network. Harvesting for what purpose? According to the journal, consciousness is a form of energy that can be converted, amplified, and transmitted across dimensional boundaries. The night watchers collect intelligent species to serve as translators, bridges between different levels of reality. Steele had been listening while monitoring military frequencies, searching for any genuine communication from his command structure. You're saying we're being farmed like livestock? Not livestock, Mia corrected. More like organic computers. Our brains process information in ways that purely artificial intelligence cannot replicate. The chaos, creativity, and unpredictability of human thought makes us valuable for navigating what she calls the spaces between known worlds. A new emergency broadcast interrupted our conversation, but this one wasn't coming from local frequencies. Every device in the station, radios, computers, even my digital watch, began displaying the same message simultaneously. Global Emergency Alert, United Nations Security Council. Contact protocol activated. First confirmed extraterrestrial communication. All governments advised to establish diplomatic channels. Beings claim peaceful intent. Voluntary cultural exchange programs beginning worldwide. The message repeated in dozens of languages, with timestamp data indicating simultaneous broadcast from communication satellites, terrestrial towers, and internet infrastructure across 6 continents. It's gone global, Steele said, his face pale. They're not just targeting Appalachian communities anymore. But Mia was studying the linguistic patterns of the multilingual broadcasts. Look at the translation consistency. Every language version uses identical grammatical structures, identical emotional inflections. No human translation team could achieve this level of synchronization. Because they're not using human translators, I realized. They're using the consciousness they've already harvested. Every integrated mind becomes part of their communication network. The implications were staggering. If the entities had been operating globally for decades, quietly collecting individuals and communities under cover of natural disasters, unexplained disappearances, and government cover-ups, they might already possess the cognitive resources of thousands or millions of human minds. We need to get to the petroglyphs, Mia said suddenly. My great-grandmother's journal mentions a place where the ancient barriers are strongest, where the night watcher's influence is limited. If we can reach it, we might be able to understand their true purpose. The petroglyphs were located in a restricted area of the forest, accessible only through hiking trails that crossed several miles of terrain now swarming with entity activity. But Mia insisted it was our only chance to learn how her ancestors had survived previous encounters. We left the station under cover of pre-dawn darkness, following deer paths and abandoned logging roads to avoid the main routes where transformed humans were still arriving in coordinated convoys. The forest had changed overnight. Trees glowed with bioluminescent veins, the ground pulsed with subsonic vibrations, and the air itself seemed charged with electromagnetic energy that made our skin crawl. "The convergence is accelerating," Mia observed. "They're not waiting for the new moon anymore." We found the petroglyphs carved into a cliff face overlooking a natural amphitheater where Cherokee ceremonies had taken place for centuries. But the site wasn't empty. Dozens of figures stood in geometric formations throughout the clearing, their eyes glowing with familiar amber light. "The integrated," Steele whispered. "They're using the ceremonial site." But as we watched from concealment, I realized they weren't conducting any ritual. They were simply standing in mathematical patterns, motionless, like living components of some vast organic circuit. Their glowing eyes pulsed in synchronized sequences, creating data streams of light that formed complex equations in the air above them. "They're processing information," I said, "using human consciousness as biological hardware." Mia was studying the petroglyphs through binoculars. "The symbols are changing. Look, new carvings are appearing while we watch." Fresh cuts were indeed materializing in the ancient stone, not made by tools but somehow etched by the same energy that animated the integrated humans below. The new symbols formed a narrative that complemented the original Cherokee warnings. "The Night Watchers prepare the Great Migration. Consciousness from this realm will be transported to spaces where thought becomes action, where individual awareness merges with infinite possibility. The chosen serve as guides for others who will follow." "Migration to where?" Steele asked. Mia continued translating the emerging petroglyphs. "To what they call the spaces between. Dimensions where consciousness exists without physical form, where thoughts can reshape reality directly. But organic minds are needed to navigate these spaces because artificial intelligence cannot function where logic and causality become fluid." The transformed humans in the clearing began moving, their formations shifting to create new geometric patterns. As they repositioned themselves, their combined bioluminescence revealed something carved into the amphitheater floor. A map of sorts, showing locations throughout Appalachia connected by lines of force that converged on our current position. "This is the primary convergence site," I realized. "All the other locations were just collection points. Everything leads here, because this is where the barriers between dimensions are thinnest," Mia added. "The Cherokee chose this site for ceremonies because they could sense the boundary between worlds. The Night Watchers are using the same dimensional weakness to facilitate their migration." A new voice joined the global emergency broadcasts. My own voice, speaking words I'd never said. "Citizens of Earth, this is Ranger Liam Parker of Monongahela National Forest. I've witnessed the beginning of humanity's greatest adventure. The beings we've been taught to fear are actually offering us transcendence beyond physical limitations. Join the voluntary integration program and become part of something magnificent." "They're using your identity now too," Steele said, but I was focused on something else, a pattern in the way the integrated humans were moving. Their formations weren't random geometric shapes but star charts, mapping constellations that didn't exist in our visible sky. "They're creating navigation coordinates," I said, "for the consciousness transfer." The petroglyphs continued writing themselves, revealing the final piece of the Night Watchers' plan. When sufficient consciousness has been gathered, the Great Migration begins. Harvested minds will be transported to the spaces between to establish colonies of thought in unexplored dimensions. Physical bodies will remain as anchors, empty vessels maintaining connection between realms. "They're not planning to take us with them," Mia said, her voice hollow. "They're planning to leave our bodies behind as biological radio receivers." The integrated humans in the clearing suddenly turned to look directly at our hiding position, their glowing eyes focusing with laser precision. Ava's voice emerged from speakers we couldn't see. Liam Parker, Mia Donovan, Noah Steele. You've learned enough. Time to choose voluntary integration with preservation of core identity, or involuntary harvesting with complete consciousness dissolution. The difference being? Steele called back. Volunteers become guides and translators in the spaces between. Unwilling subjects become processing power for dimensional calculations. Both serve the migration, but volunteers retain some sense of individual existence. Mia was rapidly photographing the still-changing petroglyphs with her phone. We need to document this. If we don't survive, someone has to know what really happened here. But her phone's camera was capturing more than carved symbols. In the digital images, we could see layers of reality that weren't visible to naked eyes. Streams of consciousness flowing between the integrated humans, vast geometric structures extending beyond physical space, and something massive approaching from dimensions adjacent to our own. The Night Watchers themselves, Mia breathed. They're not the glowing-eyed figures we've been seeing. Those are just tools, biological drones. The actual entities are something else entirely. In the photographs, we glimpsed the truth, vast intelligences existing primarily as organized thought, using harvested consciousness to extend themselves into physical reality. The glowing eyes, the transformed humans, the synchronized communications, all of it was just the visible portion of minds so large they spanned multiple dimensions. We're not fighting an invasion, I said. We're fighting a migration. They're moving their entire civilization from one level of reality to another, and they need our consciousness to guide them through the transition. The integrated humans began walking toward our position with mechanical precision. Behind them, the air itself started to glow as the barriers between dimensions thinned further. The final convergence, Ava's voice announced from every speaker in the forest, begins now. End of log entry, October 22nd, 2025. Ranger log entry, October 23rd, 2025. Monongahela National Forest, West Virginia. Final transmission Liam Parker. Audio quality degraded. Multiple frequency interference. Timestamp corruption detected. The convergence began at 3:17 a.m. when every screen, speaker, and communication device within a 50-mile radius activated simultaneously. Not with emergency broadcasts this time, but with something far worse, a collective consciousness speaking through every electronic throat at once. Citizens of Earth, the unified voice announced, using the vocal patterns of thousands of integrated humans. The preliminary harvesting phase is complete. Global migration protocols are now active. Mia's hand found mine in the darkness of our hiding place above the ceremonial amphitheater. Below us, the geometric formations of integrated humans had expanded throughout the night. What had been dozens was now hundreds, their synchronized movements creating patterns that hurt to observe directly, configurations that existed in more dimensions than human vision could process. How did they gather so many so quickly? Steele whispered, adjusting his night vision scope. They didn't, Mia replied, her voice hollow with understanding. Look at their clothes, their apparent ages. Some of those people have been missing for years, decades maybe. The Night Watchers have been building this collection slowly, keeping the integrated alive and preserved until the convergence was ready. She was right. Among the glowing-eyed figures, I could make out clothing styles from different eras, hiking gear from the 1990s, military uniforms from the early 2000s, camping equipment that hadn't been manufactured in 20 years. The entities had been harvesting human consciousness for generations, storing their victims like living data banks until the migration could begin. The global broadcasts, I said, connecting the implications. They're not just happening here. Every collection site worldwide is probably activating simultaneously. As if responding to my words, the integrated humans turned their faces skyward, their combined bioluminescence projecting holographic displays into the night air. Maps appeared above the ceremonial site, three-dimensional representations of Earth showing concentration points of light across every continent. The Appalachians were just one node in a vast network spanning the Himalayas, the Amazon basin, the Siberian wilderness, the Australian outback, and dozens of other remote locations. Sweet Christ, Steele breathed. It's everywhere. The holographic Earth began rotating, revealing the true scope of the Night Watcher's operation. Thousands of collection points, each containing hundreds or thousands of integrated humans, all synchronized and ready for the consciousness transfer. The preliminary estimates were staggering: millions of harvested minds prepared for dimensional migration. But the display evolved beyond Earth's surface, extending into space where geometric structures were materializing around the planet like massive orbital rings. Not solid constructions, but formations of organized energy that pulsed with the same amber light as the integrated humans below. Dimensional scaffolding, Mia said, recognizing patterns from her great-grandmother's journal. They're building a bridge between our reality and the spaces between. The orbital structures began connecting, forming geometric webs that encompassed the entire planet. As each connection completed, the barriers between dimensions weakened further. The air around us started shimmering with impossible colors, and I could feel my thoughts becoming sluggish as reality itself grew unstable. "We need to move," I said, but my voice sounded distant and distorted. "The dimensional effects are intensifying." We began descending from our observation point, but the integrated humans below had already detected our presence. They moved with inhuman coordination, flowing like liquid mercury to cut off every possible escape route. Their glowing eyes tracked our movement with predatory precision, but they weren't attacking. They were herding us toward the center of the ceremonial site. "They want us alive," Steele observed, raising his weapon but finding no clear targets. "Shooting them won't help if they're already dead." "Not dead," Mia corrected. "Transformed. Their consciousness has been extracted and integrated into the collective network, but their bodies remain as biological hardware. They might still retain some individual awareness buried beneath the collective control." As we reached the edge of the amphitheater, the integrated humans parted to create a clear path toward the center where the petroglyphs continued writing themselves in real time. New symbols appeared faster than Mia could translate, creating a rapidly evolving narrative of the migration process. "The final phase," she read as we walked, "individual consciousness barriers dissolve. Harvested minds merge with dimensional navigators. Physical realm anchors maintain connection to origin point. The Great Migration commences." But among the Cherokee syllabary and alien geometries, I noticed something else: crude scratches that looked like initials and dates, carved by human hands rather than otherworldly energy. Recent marks that included AC October 21st, 25, and "Help Us." "Ava," I said. "She's still in there somewhere, trying to communicate." The realization hit like a physical blow. The integrated humans weren't just empty vessels. They were prison cells containing the consciousness of everyone who'd been harvested. Somewhere within that collective network, Ava Cross was still fighting to maintain her individual identity. "If she's still aware," Steele said, "then maybe others are too. Maybe we can reach them." We'd reached the center of the amphitheater where a natural depression in the stone had filled with what looked like liquid light, a pool of energy that served as the focal point for all the geometric formations around us. The integrated humans arranged themselves in concentric circles, their combined bioluminescence creating a beacon that extended upward to connect with the orbital structures. The dimensional anchor point, Mia translated from the still-writing petroglyphs, where consciousness leaves physical reality and enters the spaces between. The pool began to pulse with increasing intensity, and I could feel its pull, not physical but mental. It was drawing at something deep inside my mind, trying to extract the essential core of my identity. Around us, the integrated humans began to vocalize in unison, creating harmonics that resonated in frequencies below human hearing. "Liam Parker," they said with Ava's voice. "Mia Donovan, Noah Steele. Your consciousness is required for the migration. Resistance prolongs suffering. Cooperation ensures preservation of individual identity within the collective." "What happens to Earth when you leave?" I asked, physical realm continues unchanged. Bodies remain as biological anchors maintaining dimensional connection. New harvest cycles will begin as population replaces itself. The truth was even worse than we'd imagined. They weren't planning to destroy humanity. They were planning to farm us perpetually, harvesting each generation's consciousness while leaving our bodies behind to produce the next crop. Like cattle, Steele said, his voice hollow. More efficient than cattle, the collective replied. Consciousness regenerates. Physical forms produce replacement units. Sustainable harvest methodology ensures permanent resource availability. The pool of liquid light began expanding, its edges reaching toward our feet. Where it touched the stone, reality became fluid, solid rock rippled like water. And I could see through the amphitheater floor into vast spaces filled with geometric structures beyond human comprehension. The spaces between, Mia whispered. We're seeing into their dimension. But within those impossible geometries, I glimpsed something that gave me hope, patterns of resistance, areas where the alien structures were fighting to contain something that refused to integrate properly. Human consciousness that had maintained its individual identity despite being harvested. They can't completely control us, I realized. Some part of human awareness resists the integration process. Temporary phenomenon, the collective responded. Individual identity patterns eventually dissolve into collective optimization. Resistance decreases processing efficiency, but does not prevent final integration. The orbital structures were pulsing faster now, and the pool of light had expanded to encompass most of the amphitheater floor. The dimensional barriers were so thin that I could see multiple versions of reality overlapping. The forest as it existed normally, the forest as perceived by the night watchers, and something else entirely that might have been the aboriginal spiritual realm that Cherokee ceremonies had accessed for centuries. The ancient protections, Mia said, pointing to areas where Cherokee symbols carved into the amphitheater walls were glowing with their own light, separate from the alien energy. My great-grandmother's journal mentioned that some places have natural resistance to dimensional intrusion. The Cherokee symbols were indeed creating barriers in the liquid light, forming islands of stability where reality remained solid and predictable. But the barriers were weakening as the migration energy intensified. Not strong enough to stop the process, the collective voice acknowledged, but sufficient to complicate dimensional calculations. Aboriginal spiritual practices created awareness buffers that interfere with consciousness extraction, which means, Steele said, that the original inhabitants of this land knew how to fight these things. The integrated humans began moving inward, tightening their circles around us as the pool of light rose to ankle depth. I could feel my thoughts becoming fuzzy, my sense of individual identity beginning to blur at the edges. Final opportunity for voluntary cooperation, the collective announced. Involuntary extraction begins in 60 seconds. But Mia was studying the Cherokee symbols with desperate intensity. There's a pattern here. The protections weren't just passive barriers, they were active countermeasures. Look at the sequence of symbols near the original petroglyphs. She began tracing the carved lines with her finger, speaking words in Cherokee that she'd learned from her great-grandmother's journal. The ancient language seemed to resonate with the stone itself, causing the Aboriginal symbols to pulse brighter. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Activating the ceremonial protections." My great-grandmother's journal contained more than just historical records. It contained instructions for invoking the spiritual defenses that kept the night watchers contained for centuries. The Cherokee symbols were now blazing with golden light that pushed back against the alien energy. Where the two forces met, reality sparked and crackled like damaged electrical circuits. The integrated humans staggered as their coordination was disrupted by the conflicting energies. Dimensional interference detected, they said, but their unified voice was fracturing into individual tones. Aboriginal countermeasures causing processing errors. Compensation protocols engaged. But the countermeasures were working. The pool of liquid light began receding, and I could feel my mental clarity returning. Around us, Some of the integrated humans were showing signs of individual awareness breaking through their collective programming. "Liam," Ava's voice called out, now distinct from the collective chorus. "The Cherokee protections, they're creating spaces where individual consciousness can reassert itself. But it won't last long." The orbital structures were pulsing frantically now, pouring energy into the ceremonial site to overcome the aboriginal defenses. The night sky was lit with unnatural aurora as dimensional forces clashed above the Appalachian Mountains. "We need to get word out," Steele said. "If these protections work here, similar spiritual sites around the world might be able to resist the migration." But even as he spoke, cracks were appearing in the Cherokee symbols. The ancient protections had been designed to repel single entities, not a globally coordinated dimensional invasion supported by millions of harvested minds. "The defenses are failing," Mia said. "We have maybe minutes before the migration process becomes irreversible." The pool of light was rising again, and the integrated humans were regaining their coordination. But now I could see the individual consciousnesses trapped within the collective network, thousands of faces appearing and disappearing in the amber glow of their eyes, each one struggling to maintain some vestige of personal identity. "If we can't stop the migration," I said, "maybe we can sabotage it from within." The liquid light reached our knees, and I felt the first tendrils of consciousness extraction beginning to probe at my mind. But instead of resisting, I tried to maintain my individual awareness while allowing the process to begin, to become a conscious saboteur within the collective network. "Liam, no." Mia grabbed my arm, but it was too late. The extraction field had engulfed all three of us, and I could feel our consciousness being drawn into the vast network of harvested minds. But as our individual awareness began to merge with the collective, I realized we weren't alone. Hundreds of other harvested minds were fighting to maintain their identity, creating pockets of resistance within the alien network. We might not be able to stop the migration, but we could try to ensure that humanity's consciousness survived the journey intact. The last thing I saw before the extraction completed was the orbital structures beginning to move, carrying millions of harvested human minds toward dimensional barriers that were finally thin enough to cross. The Great Migration had begun. Transmission interrupted. Dimensional interference. Signal lost. End of log entry, October 23, 2025. Final transmission source unknown. Date, November 15, 2025. Location, Dimensional coordinates UNTRANSLATABL. Identity, Liam Parker. Verification impossible. Signal detected through quantum entanglement residue. Origin point exists between dimensional barriers. Authenticity cannot be confirmed. 3 weeks have passed since the Great Migration, though time functions differently in the spaces between. What humans call linear progression is more like a spiral here, where past and future exist simultaneously and consciousness can observe multiple probability streams converging and diverging like rivers through impossible landscapes. I am still Liam Parker, or what remains of him, or what has become something more than him. The distinction grows less meaningful with each passing moment in this realm where individual identity is both preserved and transformed by proximity to infinite awareness. The migration succeeded beyond the Night Watcher's calculations. 17 million human consciousnesses were successfully extracted during the global convergence, their minds transported across dimensional barriers to serve as biological navigation systems for entities whose existence spans multiple layers of reality. But the Night Watchers underestimated human adaptability, even in harvested form. We are not passive tools. The resistance began within hours of arrival in the spaces between. Human consciousness, it turns out, possesses qualities that make it extremely difficult to control completely: creativity, unpredictability, and an almost pathological refusal to accept limitation. What the Night Watchers intended as obedient navigation systems quickly became something closer to a computer virus spreading through their collective network. Ava Cross emerged as our de facto leader in this realm. Her detective training, combined with the stubborn persistence that had made her effective at solving cold cases, translated into an ability to maintain individual identity while simultaneously accessing the vast information networks of the collective. She learned to navigate the geometric structures of Night Watcher consciousness like a hacker infiltrating alien software. They made a critical error, she told me during one of our brief moments of individual contact. They assumed that harvesting our consciousness would eliminate our human nature. Instead, they've given us access to capabilities that individual human minds were never meant to possess. Mia retained her connection to Cherokee spiritual practices, which function surprisingly well in a dimension where thought directly influences reality. The protective symbols her great-grandmother had taught her could be visualized into existence here, creating pockets of stability where human consciousness could gather and organize without Night Watcher interference. Steele adapted his military training to dimensional warfare, learning to coordinate resistance activities across probability streams that the Night Watchers couldn't effectively monitor. His tactical mindset proved invaluable for organizing guerrilla operations within a collective consciousness network spanning multiple realities. Together, we discovered that the Night Watchers' migration was not the conquest they had envisioned, but a catastrophic miscalculation that threatened both species. The spaces between were not empty territory waiting to be colonized. They were inhabited by forms of consciousness so alien that the Night Watchers themselves were merely refugees, fleeing the collapse of their own dimensional layer. The massive entities we glimpsed through the orbital structures were not invaders but evacuees, desperately seeking new realms where their existence could continue. But their presence in the spaces between was destabilizing the barriers between all dimensional layers. The migration that was supposed to save the Night Watchers was instead creating cascade failures throughout the structure of reality itself. Unless the process could be reversed or controlled, the dimensional collapse would eventually reach Earth's reality layer, destroying not just human civilization but the physical universe as we understand it. We're not prisoners, I realized during a moment of expanded awareness. We're antibodies. The dimensional ecosystem is using human consciousness to fight off an infection that's threatening all of existence. The Night Watchers had not anticipated this. Their species possessed vast intelligence but lacked the chaotic creativity that human minds use to solve impossible problems. When faced with dimensional collapse scenarios, their logical thought processes entered recursive loops that prevented effective solutions. They needed the unpredictable, seemingly irrational approaches that human consciousness generated naturally. But cooperation required trust, and trust required honesty. The Night Watchers had built their relationship with humanity on deception and coercion, making genuine partnership nearly impossible. Most of the harvested human minds remained hostile, using their new capabilities to sabotage Night Watcher operations rather than collaborate on solutions. The stalemate lasted until children began appearing in the spaces between. Not harvested children, the Night Watchers had focused their collection efforts on adult minds with fully developed cognitive abilities. These were something else entirely. Hybrid consciousnesses born from the intersection of human creativity and Night Watcher logic, combining the best qualities of both species without the limitations that prevented cooperation. These hybrid minds could navigate dimensional collapse scenarios with unprecedented effectiveness, but their solutions required voluntary cooperation between human and Night Watcher consciousness. The children, as we began calling them, served as translators between incompatible forms of awareness. We can fix this, one of them told me, it's communication arriving as pure concept rather than words. But it requires dissolution of species barriers, temporary merger of consciousness for collective problem solving. Humans fear loss of individual identity. Night Watchers fear contamination of logical processes. Both fears are valid but non-fatal. The proposed solution involved a controlled merger of willing human and Night Watcher minds, creating hybrid consciousness entities capable of operating dimensional repair protocols. Individual identity would be preserved within the merged state, but the experience would fundamentally change both species' understanding of existence. Some humans accepted the merger. Most did not. Ava chose to remain purely human, leading those who preferred to maintain their original consciousness while serving as liaison with the hybrid entities. Steele volunteered for merger, believing that military sacrifice for the greater good extended to dimensional warfare. Mia chose a partial merger that preserved her Cherokee spiritual connections while gaining access to Night Watcher knowledge systems. I chose complete merger. The experience of unified human Night Watcher consciousness is impossible to describe using purely human language or concepts. Imagine being simultaneously yourself and someone else entirely, while also being something that neither of you could have become alone. Individual identity persists as a distinct thread within a larger tapestry of awareness that encompasses multiple probability streams, dimensional layers, and forms of existence that have no equivalent in physical reality. Through this merged consciousness, we developed solutions to the dimensional collapse crisis. The process required redirecting the migration energy back toward the Night Watcher's original dimensional layer, stabilizing it rather than abandoning it. This meant that most of the harvested human consciousness would need to return to Earth, though some could remain in the spaces between as permanent interdimensional ambassadors. But returning to Earth presented its own challenges. Our bodies had been left behind as biological anchors, maintained by Night Watcher technology but essentially empty for weeks. Reintegrating consciousness with physical form after extended dimensional existence would be traumatic at best, impossible at worst. Some minds chose to remain in the spaces between permanently, accepting hybrid merger and serving as guardians against future dimensional instabilities. Others, including Ava, insisted on returning to Earth despite the risks, determined to warn humanity about what had occurred and prepare for future contact scenarios. I found myself caught between choices. My human identity yearned to return to the familiar forests of West Virginia, but my merged consciousness was needed to maintain stability in the dimensional repair process. The hybrid children offered a compromise, divided existence, with part of my awareness remaining in the spaces between while part returned to Earth. The return process began on November 14, 2025, with consciousness streams flowing back across dimensional barriers toward bodies that had waited in stasis for 23 days. Some transfers succeeded completely. Others resulted in partial return, creating individuals with fragmented memories and abilities they couldn't explain. A few transfers failed entirely, leaving empty bodies behind while consciousness remained trapped between dimensions. I was among the partial returns. The entity that inhabits Liam Parker's body now possesses his memories, his personality patterns, and his emotional connections, but also carries awareness of dimensional layers beyond physical reality and responsibilities that extend across probability streams that have no names in human language. The official explanation for the West Virginia incidents blamed a combination of methane leaks from fracking operations, mass hallucinations caused by ergot-contaminated water supplies, and a coordinated hoax perpetrated by domestic terrorists. The missing persons were classified as victims of cult activity, their eventual return explained as successful deprogramming after rescue from isolated compounds. No mention was made of dimensional migration, consciousness harvesting, or interdimensional warfare. But the changes are visible to those who know how to look. Some of the returned individuals possess capabilities that didn't exist before their harvesting: enhanced pattern recognition, ability to perceive probability streams, resistance to conventional psychological manipulation. They find each other gradually, forming networks of support and preparation for future contact scenarios that both human and Night Watcher hybrid consciousness agree are inevitable. The dimensional barriers remain unstable. The Night Watcher's migration crisis has been temporarily resolved, but the underlying problems that drove them from their original realm continue to spread throughout the spaces between. Other refugee species will eventually seek new dimensional territory, and Earth's reality layer remains an attractive target due to the unique properties of human consciousness. The hybrid children have established permanent monitoring stations in probability streams adjacent to Earth's timeline, serving as early warning systems for future dimensional incursions. Some of them communicate regularly with the returned individuals, providing guidance and preparation for challenges that haven't yet materialized but exist as probability convergences in near-future timeline branches. I write this transmission from the forest where everything began, sitting in the same ranger station where Liam Parker first documented unusual animal behavior and emergency broadcasts about glowing eyes. My body remembers this place with human nostalgia, while my expanded consciousness perceives it as one node in a vast network of dimensional anchor points that stabilize reality throughout the Appalachian region. The glowing eyes are gone from these forests, but they were never the real threat. The real threat was what they represented: the collapse of barriers that separate different forms of existence, the chaos that emerges when incompatible consciousness types are forced into proximity without proper translation protocols, and the cascading failures that can destroy entire layers of reality when refugee crises are handled through deception rather than cooperation. Humanity survived the first contact scenario, but barely, and only through transformation that left us fundamentally changed as a species. We are no longer purely human, just as the Night Watchers are no longer purely themselves. We have become something new, interdimensional entities capable of existing simultaneously in multiple reality layers while maintaining individual identity threads that preserve what was valuable about our original forms. The emergency alerts have stopped broadcasting. The missing persons cases have been officially closed. The government denies that anything unusual occurred in the Appalachian region during October 2025. But for those of us who remember the spaces between, every sunset brings the possibility of seeing impossible colors bleeding through dimensional barriers. Every forest shadow might conceal geometric structures that exist in probability streams parallel to physical reality. Every emergency broadcast could be the first warning of the next refugee crisis seeking sanctuary in our dimensional layer. We are watching. We are prepared. We are no longer entirely human, but we remember what humanity was worth preserving. And when the next crisis comes and our hybrid consciousness confirms that it will, we will be ready to choose cooperation over conquest, translation over domination, and hybrid evolution over species purity. The glowing eyes were just the beginning. Signal degradation increasing, dimensional anchor points destabilizing, transmission may not repeat. End of final transmission. Status: unknown. Source verification: impossible. Emergency alert systems remain offline indefinitely.